folks, welcome to the webinar this evening. We're going to wait a minute or two here while things get started with folks joining us. I see lots of people hopping on here. Thanks for being with us tonight. We're going to wait just a minute or two for everyone to join the webinar.
40 people, pretty good, huh?
Mm-hmm. Hi there, folks. If you're just joining us, welcome to the webinar this evening. We've got lots of people hopping in. We're going to wait just a minute or two here for everyone to join. And I put a little welcome over in the chat. If you've got the chat open, you can feel free to say hello there and let us know where you're joining us from. All right, wow, we've got folks all the way from Fairfax, Virginia, from Indiana, Santa Cruz, St. Paul, Fairbanks, Alaska. We're all over the map here tonight, which is great. Lots of shout outs and hellos to you, Josh, in the chat.
Yay.
All right. It's 3 minutes after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started here and others can join us as they are hopping in. I'd like to just start off by saying welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Here we are at the beginning of the virtual wooden boat show. First time we've ever done this here at North House Folk School, but 2020 seems to be a first for many things, or many things are happening for the first time this year. So thanks for being with us on the journey as we try things out tonight. My name is Sarah. I'm a program manager here at North House Folk School, and I'm excited to be joined tonight by Jake Fee, one of our interns, and Josh Tolkan, resident artisan in the Artisan Development Program. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this webinar will work tonight. Then Jake will talk briefly about the rest of the events going on this week. Then we'll turn things over to Josh to share his presentation. And we should wrap up at right about the hour mark. It may go a little bit over if there's lots of questions and answers. But since this is an online webinar, feel free to take off anytime you need to. We won't be offended. If you've never been on a Zoom webinar before, there are a few things you should know. As you probably can tell, we can't see you or hear you, but you can see and hear us. So there are a few different ways for you to communicate with us if you'd like to during the webinar tonight. One way is through the chat. If you don't have the chat open yet, if you move your mouse over the bottom of the window for Zoom, or if you're on a phone, it might be along the side, you should see an icon that says chat. If you tap on that icon, it'll open up the webinar chat and you can see where people are introducing themselves, saying hello and telling us where they are joining us from. Another handy feature of the webinar is the Q&A box. If you click on Q&A, which you'll find right near that same spot that you found the chat button, you can ask a question and we'll have Josh answer those questions either in the middle of the presentation, he might stop and pause for a moment, or at the end. So we really do appreciate if you put the if you have a question, to type it into the Q&A box so we can keep track of them, because often in the chat they sort of disappear as more and more chats go. Another thing to note about the chat is that you can type a message to everybody who's attending tonight in the webinar, or if you see right next to where it says to, there's a little drop-down menu. You could choose to send a private message just to us panelists if there's something that you're having trouble hearing or seeing, or a question that you have just for us. That's a little bit about how to use the features of the Zoom webinar. On the very unlikely chance that things get really rocky with the internet, which is highly unlikely to happen, but if it were to happen and we were to get disconnected for some reason, just know that we will be recording this webinar and we can email out a recording of the webinar to you tomorrow if that were to happen. All right. With that, I'll hand things over to you, Jake.
Yeah. Hiya. My name's Jake. Like Sarah said, I'm one of the interns here. And before we get started, I'll let you know that tomorrow at 10 a.m., we're going to have a tour of a recreated 1850s Great Lakes cargo boat, which is going to be very cool. And then at noon, we're going to have a lunch and learn with Mercedes Hansen. She's going to be making nets. That's at noon. And then if you want to take some online classes, which are kind of new and exploratory, we've got 2 happening this weekend that still have open spots, and that's casting on for knitters and brown butter cooking. So please welcome to the digital stage, Josh Tolkan, resident artist in the Artisan Development Program at North House, a boat builder and a Scandinavian adventurer.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen here and start my presentation. This is just a talk about what I learned when I was in Norway. I was in Norway from from early February until early March, and came back when the coronavirus started sweeping across the world. But while I was there, I was living primarily in a town called Norheimsund, which is about an hour and a half east of Bergen, and it is where the Hardanger Center is. And the Center means Ship Preservation Center. And it's a really cool working waterfront museum where they're practicing traditional boat building from very early history all the way through, you know, sort of like a classic era of big shipbuilding from more recent history. And I was studying with a man named Peter Helland-Hansen, and Peter's really made a career around these small craft from the Hardanger Fjord. And in the 80s, when Peter finished his wooden boat training, he had great opportunities to go around to lots of aging, older boat builders and learn directly from them. And he has sort of carried on all the techniques that he learned from those builders back in the 80s. And in his opinion, Peter believes that he is building very true to the way the exact methods, his methods are very similar to the methods that were used all the way dating back to the early 1800s. And beyond that, the actual boats that he builds clearly have history that starts with the Viking ships. So with that, I'll show you a picture of the Usberg ship. This is in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, and it's really well preserved, beautiful boat. But what I want to point out to you is the use of these big grown timbers here, curved pieces of wood that are grown into curves, and they are used to support the mast in this application, but used all throughout the boat along the bottom. And so they are using grown curves to build all the curves they need in the boat. And you can see from this boat, these are some other boats that were found in the Viking Ship Museum. And these are small boats that were found with a wreck called the Tune. And when I saw these boats, I was so excited because they are so similar to the boats that I was building with Peter. And it's so clear how the history of the boats that Peter is building and these boats are so similar. And the ways that they are similar relate to this building style called Clinker. And some of the characteristics of Clinker building are that it has wide overlapping planks. And this is a little different from more Western styles of overlapping planks, something that you may have heard of lapstrake. And primarily the difference between lapstrake and clinker is that often lapstrake uses narrower planks and a larger number of narrower planks. But beyond that, there's also just a difference in some of the details and some of the methods for building these boats. Clinker boats are built right side up, and they also are always referencing off of a center line that's on the sort of top of the boat. So this is right here is the top edge of planking right here and back here. And so this center line referencing off of a straight upright building frame is a characteristic of clinker boats. And the most interesting part probably is how the frames are built. And this diagram shows the a cross-section of the frames in a clinker boat. And you can see here there are 3 grown timbers, a curved piece in the bottom here, and then a piece here, and a third piece here. So 3 naturally curved pieces of wood that are put together in this fashion time and again in all the clinker boats. And finally, the shape of these clinker boats from Norway is very characteristic. And what's unique about this shape is that it's, unlike most boats you see today, this boat is slightly fatter forward of the middle of the boat. So Peter said that the widest part of these clinker boats is at about 40% of the length. So slightly forward of the middle of the boat. And what's interesting about this shape is a shape that you see in nature if you look under magnifying glass or a microscope at little water creatures. Lots of copepods and macroinvertebrates that swim through the water have shapes like this. So it's really fascinating to think about this water beetle shape and how hydrodynamically efficient it actually is, and think about if Vikings knew anything about this when they were designing boats in this fashion. So beyond talking about how a lot of clinker boats are similar, I want to talk to you a little bit about how clinker boats are different from one another. And I just have this simple map of Norway. It's actually a pretty old map of Norway. You'll notice the Soviet Union on there. It's probably from the 60s or 70s, but it's a useful just to sort of illustrate some basic geographical differences. And so there's kind of 3 regions that we can talk about when talking about boats of Norway. There's boats from the southern region here that is in an area close to Oslo and close to the beginning of the Baltic Sea. Baltic Sea is in here. And so in this area transitioning into the Baltic Sea, waters are more protected and generally warmer, and a totally different set of conditions down here than we have up here on the northern coast of Norway, where there are lots of islands that people are trying to get out to all the time. There's communities living on islands up here. There's also direct exposure to the North Sea and even to the Arctic Sea as they get even further north. And then finally, in this sort of middle section of Norway, is the area where a lot of the big fjords classically are. And there's another set of conditions, that we see in the fjords in the mid-coast of Norway. So here are some boats from the southern inland areas of Norway. And these boats are characterized by their much heavier construction and by their sort of very round, sort of blunt entry to the water. You can kind of see here that this gunwale is built in sort of a cap rail style, really wide piece. These boats were often never removed from the water, so they could be built heavier because they never lifted them out of the water as a lot of the other small boats were. And Peter didn't like to talk too much about boats that were not from the Hardanger region, but what I seem to gather is that these boats they would sometimes just sink them in the coldest months of the year if they weren't going to be using them for a while. Rather than pulling them out of the water, they would just put a couple of rocks in them and sink them to the bottom of the water, and then bail them out when they wanted them again. Yeah, these boats are kind of well adapted to slightly warmer waters, slightly less exposed conditions. They're very shallow. They don't have a lot of rise up forward, so they don't do a particularly good job of keeping waves off of them and such, as you'll see with the next boats, the boats from the northern part of Norway. And this is where we get this rather characteristic, really tall stem, which is good at breaking through waves and keeping the boat dry. And also down here, this is called the forefoot. So we have a stem and a keel, and a forefoot is this area where you transition between the two. And so this forefoot is super sharp, almost 90-degree angle in these northern boats. So that's another thing that really helps a boat stay straight and steer straight in conditions that are really affected by waves and other things. So northern boats have, you know, this sort of set of characteristics that make them very rugged for exposed big wave, cold water conditions. And the area that I was hanging out in is near Bergen, which is right here. And Bergen is about, I was in this town called Norheimsund, which is about an hour and a half from Bergen. And this is the Hardanger Fjord, all the way down from here, up that direction. And a couple other interesting spots to learn about the boats of the Hardanger Fjord is a town here called Strandebarm, and a town over here called Usoro. So I'll kind of talk about these areas now. And this is just a view of the Hardanger Fjord in March. This is taken from just outside of Norheimsund. And this just kind of, I just wanted to show you guys some pictures of what these fjords are like, where the mountains tumble right down into the sea. Really dramatic and breathtaking scenery everywhere you look. Here's a picture from just outside of Strandebarm. I took the bus there. This the kind of regional buses of Norway. Took a little bus. It was about a half-hour ride, maybe less, from Norheimsund, and a beautiful sunny day. But these areas in the fjords are really affected by tides that roll in down the length of the fjord and can really affect steerage, and can be really exposed to big waves and intense sort of sea state conditions, but also have a lot of, get pretty cold in the wintertime. So interesting set of challenges for the boat designer. And here is the dock at the Fartøveren Center in Norheimsund. And the Fartøveren Center is kind of on the edge of town to the west here. Okay, so these boats from this region, the Hardanger design of boats, they have these really circular, smooth geometry to the stem. It's really a nice, even, you know, looks like a section of a circle. And they're built in a very lightweight construction. These boats are easily lifted out of the water by 3 or 4 people, and they have very wide planks in the bow here, and they take a pretty sharp rise. They have a pretty sharp shear shape and sort of rise up toward the stem in a fairly dramatic fashion. So boats of this design were also built in a town called Us historically, and these are the Uselvar, And I went there to this historic workshop where they're building, boats in the design that has been built in this town for hundreds of years. And they're super similar. You can see the shape of the stem, and in lots of other ways, they're super, super similar to the boats built in other parts of the Hardanger Fjord. And here you can see some of the other details that are really similar. They have all these boats within the Hardanger Fjord have these really wide middle planks. These things are just kind of amazing, amazing pieces of wood here. And they have a really low freeboard. You can imagine how easy it is to haul fishing nets in over the side of the boat here. And just really lightweight construction. You can see how skinny the stem is here, and how kind of fine all the details are. This is a lady named Berit Osmundsen, and I didn't really get to meet her, but I heard about her. She is a lady who is a longtime boat builder at the workshop in Oos. This is the boat that Peter and Arnie were building while I was hanging out with them in February and March. This is a Seksaering from the Hardanger region. And so what the difference between the boats from Oos and the Hardanger boat is that the boats from Oos were a little bit more recent in history. So this Hardanger boat is an example of boats that were just sort of built all around the fjord. And then in Strandebarm, which I'll get to in a second, and in Oos, there were industries that sort of associations of builders who all were building the same boat in the same town and had some sort of industrial model of building the same boat over and over again. But they're all very similar. But one thing about these boats is that these were built with all blacksmith-made nails. These nails are these rivets are made by a blacksmith, whereas the boats from Oos, they're building them kind of not for a museum setting, but kind of for for-profit customers, sort of customer-driven model, and so they're using bronze rivets now. And nowadays a traditional wooden boat is a thing of luxury, so it's a little bit fancier than the real traditional way to build them with these nails that were finished in burnt in oil to be finished. But it has this same really giant plank in the middle here. And here's some pictures of this Hardanger boat. This picture was up in Peter's shop, and I think he probably built this boat, although I never specifically asked him, but this is a Hardanger boat that some adventure racers from France used to race. I don't really know what the details of this race were, but you can just see that these boats are, really, really seaworthy and great boats for this sort of open boat traversing and adventuring. You can imagine, this boat design was adapted to be used for just about everything in this fjord. So fishermen who are going out and fishing in the fjord would use these small boats, and people would also use them to row around just to see one another. If oftentimes in the fjord, it's just easier to go by water than go over mountains. So a boat really for all conditions. And I put this picture in up here just to, so just another beautiful shot of a Hardanger boat. And there is a boat designer named Ian Uhtred, who has, if you're a hobby boat builder, you may have heard about Ian Uhtred. He's kind of developed a reputation for designing boats, plywood versions of these Norwegian boats, and most of his boats, especially his earlier designs, his inspiration came directly from the Hardanger boat. So Uhtred's boats are sort of just a plywood adaptation of these Norwegian Hardanger boats. here's the strand of Barmeren. This is another boat that Peter has studied extensively. So Peter builds, he builds in different sizes. He builds fairings, which are four-oared boats, seksaerings, which are six-oared boats, and some bigger boats as well. And he builds either in the Hardanger style, which is the older style, or the slightly newer style, which are called strand of Barmeren. And the strand of Barmeren come from that town Strandebarm. I can kind of go back to this map maybe and show you Strandebarm is right here. And in this town Strandebarm, similar to the town of Oos, although I don't know as much about the history in Oos, but in Strandebarm they had, just an association of boat builders who worked together when they needed to. If they had a big boat or the project they needed to work together on, they did. But oftentimes they're just working separately, maybe sharing jobs, and they're all building more or less the exact same boat. And so this was sort of as the Industrial Revolution was starting to pick up steam, and things were being mass produced. But Norway was a very poor country, and so didn't really have the big factory there, but they did have access to some things. So the strand of Barmeren were built with these mass-produced galvanized rivets and galvanized nails. So that was one sort of modern adaptation of the strand of Barmeren. And the other thing that they did to make these boats easier to build and to get away with using slightly lower grade pieces of wood, they added a plank. You can see that extra plank is right here. So they don't have that one really hard to find, really big plank in the middle here. They just broke it up into two planks. So that's the strand of Barmeren. So I was just going to pause here to see if anybody has any questions before we move forward. I'm going to go into some more technical stuff, but this has sort of been an overview of, boats and types of boats from around Norway and things like that.
Awesome, Josh. There's a few questions here in the Q&A. I can just ask them to you live if that works.
Yeah.
All right. Douglas is wondering, what type of wood were these boats made out of, and where do those trees grow that the wood came from?
They use pretty much exclusively the Scot pine, which is the native pine tree to Norway, but it actually grows all around Europe. And all of the pine trees that they use are, harvested. They at Hardanger, they go out into the woods and take these trees down themselves. But there's a lot of Scot pine growing in Norway. And for the keel and the stem, they use white oak. And there's not a ton of white oak in Norway. It's sort of on the very northern edge of its range. But yeah, it's white oak.
Great. Douglas also asked about details of the oars, and I think you have a picture of that coming up in a little bit, right?
I'll get into the oars at the end, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll just hold on to that one. Russ asks, he says, Josh, I'm particularly taken back with the planks of these boats. Did you know how traditionally these large planks were processed or made?
They were just flat sawn, just like ripped sawn as you would just cut a tree through and through. It is interesting to me, a lot of boat building, they say, you want to use vertical grain boards because they are more stable and won't check and twist as much over time. But yeah, these boats, they just used, flat sawn boards, which some of them had some, vertical parts, but, they're incredibly wide boards. So they, they're not all vertical grain by any means. So
great.
Yeah.
Rob asks, would these boats be workable for Lake Superior?
I definitely think so. These boats, are made to be lifted out of the water, which is an important thing in a lake that freezes. And, the fjords in some way share some characteristics to Lake Superior and the short choppy waves that can build up in a lake. So yeah, they're pretty cool.
All right, we've got just a few more here. Todd asked, do you know if this boat type predates the Iron Age, and is there evidence for construction using lashings?
There there definitely were a lot of lashings used in early, Viking age boats. And, you know, so these boats are not, as like the sort of the way that Peter is building these boats is definitely post Iron Age or but the history of these boats is such that, and I think what people like Peter are trying to understand, and sorry that I keep going back and forth between Peter and Peter. I try to say Peter as much as I can. But, trying to understand how this same form just sort of evolved as the technology of, the time was evolving. And so, it's really interesting just to sort of see they have excavated some boats that look like Viking ships that were lashed together. The big preserved Viking ships in the museums had had metal fastenings, but some of them were bronze fastenings, not steel fastenings. So.
This next question kind of goes right along with that. Lewis asked, what did the Vikings do to keep the iron rivets from leading to iron sickness?
Yeah, that's a thing. And, but, these boats still lasted a long time. And, but they didn't last forever. And iron sickness is not something that you can cure. So, but it doesn't really wreck a boat all that fast. So, you can get a good number of years out of a boat, that has galvanized fasteners or, yeah.
All right. The last question from the Q&A here, Mark asks, are the blackened boats the result of being tarred?
Yeah. So yeah, the boats just kind of become more and more black as, the UV, I think, reacts with the pine tar and makes it darker and darker, but also they often will just get another coat of pine tar every year. So combination of more coats and UV just makes the pine tar turn black. Yeah.
Okay, one more came in while you were answering that one. And then I think we can move on to the next part of the presentation. Jim asked, how thick are these planks and could they be glued up to achieve such width?
Some of the widest parts of these planks are pushing, I think 14, 16 inches. I am not sure about gluing them up. You probably could, with epoxy, glue up a plank that will work, but the planks do get twisted. And we'll sort of talk about that coming up here. And so with the dramatic twist you have, you may run into problems with a plank that has a glue joint in it. I'm not sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's it for questions.
I'll kind of move on a little bit. I might go a little faster here. The other is pictures of how this next part is kind of how you actually build these boats. And some of these pictures are taken from Peter's book, which is in Norwegian. So I can't read it, but I can look at the pictures. But I didn't get to see the first part of the Seksaering that Peter was building. He had already built the keel by the time I got there, but this is shaping the keel. It has this T shape and cross section. This is just the pattern for it. And it's really just sort of inspiring to see how efficient Norwegians are with an axe. I went to boat building school in Port Townsend, Washington at the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building, and they would have taught me to do something like this, most likely with a table saw and a variety of other tools. But with good technique and a pretty short amount of time, they can use an axe and finish up with hand plane to get this really nice T-shaped keel. This chart of numbers contains all the information you need to build the Hardanger Seksaering. And so down this axis here, you have the 4 planks on a Seksaering. And across here, you have the 4 frames on a Seksaering. And in each of those intersections, you have three sets of data. This number here is the angle of this plank at this frame. This number is the width of this plank at this frame. And this number is the distance from that string center line we talked about much earlier in the presentation to the top edge of this plank. So using these three numbers and measuring at each intersection of a plank and a frame, you can build this boat. It's a technique that uses just a lot of measuring and looking at it by eye and understanding what you're doing, and very different than a lot of the boat building that is practiced in more modern times, where there's a mold that you're shaping everything around. There's no mold here. This is all sort of out in the middle of the air using measurements like this. So it's really cool, really cool. For me, I had a hard time keeping track of all this until I went to the workshop in Oos and saw this diagram and was able to reference, because even though it's a different boat, they have the same names for the different planks. This is just a diagram of the planks on these Hardanger boats. Here's a load skiva, and this is a sort of compass that is used to register against a plank, and this is how you would determine the angle of this plank. So that's one of the measurements, is the angle of this plank off of off of flat. So measuring this way, from flat up to an angle, this measurement. So figuring out what the angle that this plank is sitting at this frame. And here is another thing that they use. These sticks are used to kind of pry the boat apart a little bit and keep the shape that you want in the boat. So these sticks help hold the distance from this string line to the top edge of this plank until the framing is all installed, and then they don't need to have these sticks as much because the shape is held by the frames. But at this point, you see there's just two of the half frames in the bottom of the boat, and the boat is still, it has some shape from all the rivets, but it still kind of springs open and apart. And so these sticks help hold the angles and the spacing that they want based on their set of measurements to build this boat that they're trying to build. So it's pretty cool. And so here's how they actually attach the planks together. The first thing that they do is they take a little tool and carve a little space, a little channel here. And into that channel, they squeeze thickened pine tar, and they take just normal pine tar and they just boil it to get it thicker. And then in that, on top of the pine tar, they use this thread made out of sheep's wool, and then they rivet the planks together using this combination of pine tar and sheep's wool as a sealant between the planks. And the planks are often not long enough, and so when they have to scarf two pieces of wood together, they use a simple sloped, just a wedge, nothing fancy like a nib scarf or something like that. They just have a slope, a wedge, and they use just a cotton linen or just a linen cloth to sort of seal up those stems. So it's really it's aspirational to see how they're able to use these natural materials to keep these boats watertight. In more modern boat building, you may use some sort of bedding compound or some sort of elastic sealant, a polysulfide type sealant, or even more modern boat building, you might use epoxy to join things like this together. But these traditional and natural materials are a lot more earth friendly and pretty effective. So it's cool to sort of see that in action and how well it can work. So this is the most complicated plank in these boats to build. I was saying before that all these planks are just sawn straight through, flat sawn boards. But there's one plank, the framhals, and this really holds the shape of the boat up forward into this dramatic, open, flaring shape that really gives the boat all the sort of volume up forward. you can kind of see how it looks like a propeller. It has a ton of twist in it. So this is shaped out of a, a 4-inch wide board, and they carve it to have this dramatic twist in it. So this is, I'll go back to this. This is this plank down here. This is the front of the boat, and this plank here, this dramatic opening shape. So I wasn't there to see this plank be made either, and it was sort of, I'd like been looking at it a lot, but seeing one that had just been made for demonstration uninstalled at the Workshop was pretty cool. So yeah, that's the Framholes. And as they go and as they install these planks, right before they're ready to rivet them together, they take a special tool called a stoffholden, and holden is sort of the name for all these planks. All the different kinds of planes. Sorry, the wood planes are holden. They're sort of like holders for blades, is I think where that's coming from. But anyway, the stoffholden is this decorative thing that has carves these 3 channels, the rounded one in the middle and these narrower pointy ones on the edge, and just gives this nice detail along the plank edges. And then they use this other one, and this is sort of used more like a scraping tool and used to put this same detail on the, when they have to go across the grain, like up in the forward part at the hood ends of the planks, they use this direct fitting. Okay. So here is fitting a frame. And so this is Arne, Peter's apprentice. And Arne is, you can see this piece of wood just comes right out of the wood. This is a piece of the Scott pine, and it's the trunk and the, one of the bigger roots right here at this angle. And Arne is just gonna, he's gonna scribe using mostly scribing to slowly fit this piece into its final position here. And at first he'll use a big bandsaw, and then he'll use an axe, and at the end he'll use just a plane or a spoke shave to finish it off. But kind of fitting this just using a variety of traditional tools as necessary to get those things fit into their final place. And here's the other side. So this is, we were talking about these 3-piece frames. There's this piece down here that's curved, and then the big piece across the middle, and then another little crook just to sort of complete and support the other edge. So this is sort of the detail of how those things go together. So I thought this was interesting also from the Workshop. These are just some examples of when they go into the forest, what they're looking for to make these shapes for the frames. Okay, so these things are all put together. The frames are fastened to the frames, other parts of the frames, using trunnels. And they also use trunnels to attach frames to planks. Planks to planks are attached using rivets. But these trunnels are essentially wooden rivets. They're bigger and stronger. And you can see they have this kind of flaring shape at their head. And then on the opposite side, so that this flared shape sort of holds into the wood right there. They drill out a little recess for it, but that's going to hold itself in snug on that side. And then the other side, they use a knife and cut little gap into the back side of the trunnel and then pound in a wedge. And so the wedge locks in and tightens up and continually tightens and tightens the trunnel up. And the flared head and the wedge keep those trunnels tight. Here's how you make a trunnel. I made a lot of trunnels while I was hanging out in Peter's shop. You start with an axe, and you can see how this is a pretty small piece of wood, and an axe is a big tool, so it's sort of intimidating for someone who's not super good with an axe to be trying to do a good job at this. But you start just kind of turning a square piece of wood into an 8-sided piece of wood by taking off the corners. And then I wasn't very good, so I'd often sort of touch up my axe work with a little sloyd knife work, just sort of further refining that. And then you use this cool tool called a nagelschnittet. I'm not exactly sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a funny looking word either way. And that's just a big pencil sharpener that carves this flared head onto each trunnel. And so that's sort of the part of the trunnel that really does the work of holding it together. So it's not just a dowel, it's a flared, has a flared section to it there. So here's just a picture of how the trunnels are using to join the planks to the frames here. And I also wanted to put in these pictures because this is a really interesting thing about how these frames, most of them are put in sort of regular or plumb, straight up and down to the boat. But in the forward and the rear parts of the boats where the shape gets really skinny, it'd be really hard to find a naturally grown piece of wood that will fit there. And boat builders who have used steam bent frames will know that you often break your frames trying to bend them into this tight shape, and sometimes you have something called like a cant rib or a cant frame that doesn't really actually connect down there. But what I think is genius about this is they just tilt these frames forward very dramatically, and they're still supporting the shape of the boat, but they you can fit a more gentle, natural growing curve into there using that method. Pretty cool. Okay, the gunnels are called easing, and what is really amazing about the way they install these easing are that rather than steaming them as I've been trained to do to get something really curved like this into its place, they would take these out and sort of sink them in water for a couple days. So over 3 or 4 days, they would just hold these at depth. I think Peter had a spot off the end of one of the piers that he uses that he said was about 17 meters deep. And so they kind of prepared this board, got all the shape in it that they wanted in terms of it kind of is skinnier and then grows a little thicker and gets skinnier again. Shaped the board and then sank it for a couple of days, and came back, and there was a few little barnacles that had, but they were easily brushed off. And what was amazing was that if you've ever steamed a piece of wood, you know that like you are rushing and going fast to try to get this into its final shape before it cools down. And Peter actually made some fishing nets that he steamed, and he was always rushing to get those fishing nets bent into the right shape before they cooled down. But they're just so relaxed getting these easing into place. They just, there's no rush because those things have been pressure cooked. And so what happens is at depth, all of the water pressure from being 17 meters deep, the water kind of forces its way into these easing, and that pressure softens the fibers and forces water deep into the piece of wood. And the softened like lignin and cell structures from being under all of that pressure and just the deep penetration of water through that piece of wood makes them really soft. It was interesting because this piece didn't dry out for about 4 days. It was still, came back, you could tell that it was still wet for days. And they did have to use a lot of force. I mean, you can see these clamps and big mallets and stuff to kind of pound and twist the gunnel into, they were using these clamps to kind of twist it a little bit so they could get it down into the slot that they had. So there was still a lot of force, but there just wasn't any rush to it. And here's a picture of Arnie. He was kerfing just with the saw, working this little joint. So he was trying to get this up a little bit right flush to there, and he was just kind of kerfing with the saw blade over and over again. Worked out really nicely. Okay, so after you got the gunnels in, you have these oarlocks, and they're called shepa. And here's Peter working on a shepa with his adze. You can see starts with just a simple piece like this and puts a lot of different curves into it. And these shepa are trunneled in with, actually these are oak trunnels. Most of the trunnels are pine, but they use harder trunnels, and they also kind of are fit in with a little sliding dovetail, kind of recessed into the easing right there. And in those oarlocks, they use oars. You can see these oarlocks they have a right angle right here, and so the oars, which are absolutely stunning oars. I got to work on oars while I was there. It was really nice. They start by just sort of freehanding a rough shape on using, they trace their pattern and just sort of freehand on the bandsaw to get to 8-sided and then work them sort of round and work in the details from there. So these looms, this is the loom of the oar. It has a square side here, and that right-angled face of the oar fits in the right-angled kind of spot in the oar lock. And the rest of the outside part of the loom is rounded over. These are just such a sweet shape. I could look at these things forever. They're very complex. They go from being fat, being really skinny, and then being wide again at the bottom. I have this nice little thumb recess here and the detail on the top of the loom. And you know, the blade has this spoon carved out of it. And they get really skinny in through here, which really allows a lot of flexibility and springiness in here. And yeah, so these oars are like lightweight and flexible, but also really durable. And it's just amazing just to think about, you know, this culture that has relied on these oars for their livelihood and for getting around. They have kind of just the perfect oar. And a lot of the oars you see in other parts of the world and in the States are just pretty clunky and fat and sort of feel a lot less useful than these oars. They're, I don't know, sort of interesting. They have really perfected the oar in addition to perfecting, you know, their clinker boats. So yeah, so that's it. This is Peter and Arne, and it was really a pleasure to get to spend a month with them. We had a lot of discussions in the shop together just about the value of working with your hands and how important it is to like teach skills to people and to share these skills with the world. And so, you know, really coming from a, you know, a really similar place, and it was I had a great time just sort of hanging out with these guys. So with that, I'll take any more questions, and yeah, hope you guys weren't too bored with all my boat building details.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. This has been wonderful to get to hear about. There is one question here in the chat, and if others are holding on to questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A at this time. Evan is wondering, is this wood being worked relatively green or seasoned?
It's seasoned. It's not, you know, it's not super green, but it's all air dried. And they go out and collect it, and then yeah, keep it in barns drying and stuff. So
okay, yeah. And the same person wondered, is the twist in the plank caved, you said?
concave.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There might have been a typo in that one.
Oh, well, it's shaped with an axe, and it's carved.
Carved, yeah, he clarified.
Carved. Yeah,
Nice.
axe adds round bottom planes, things like that. Yeah.
Okay. And Kendall's wondering, what two materials were used for the rivets?
Oh, so I mean well, there's three different styles of rivets. The older Hardanger boats have rivets that were just made from mild steel, cut by a blacksmith to a nail shape, and then burned in oil to be turned black and preserved. And that's what keeps them from rusting as quickly or having iron sickness. So they're like burned blacksmith made things. Then the more modern ones are either bronze or galvanized steel, which is like a industrial process of dipping nails into a solution of zinc, and it's sort of, they're kind of zinc coated sealed nails. That's what galvanized is.
Mark asks, is the joint in the stem of some of those a half flap?
Yeah, the stem joint is interesting. The stem joint is just a really simple, like beveled face. So, you know, they just basically shape a wedge onto the edge of the plank and fit it sort of flush to a flat stem. So there's no rabbet in there like you see with a lot of boat building. There is just a much simpler way. I wonder if I have a good shot of it here. I kind of don't, probably. But yeah, they just sort of sit flat right onto the stem. There's no rabbet in there. And rather than shaping a rabbet to kind of keep the stem rather than putting shape into the stem, they keep the stem flat and then angle the hood end of the plank. Whereas more classic boat building, less sort of traditional folk boat building, they would cut a 90-degree rabbet joint into this stem, and that will allow you to keep a full right angle in your plank, and that theoretically keeps those planks, which are made out of a softwood, kind of in more stable, hard condition. You can nail all the way through there. So here they're kind of putting these nails into the stem, and there's not a whole lot of material left into that plank because they're kind of beveling that away to get the seam there. I hope that answers that question.
We have a question from the chat. Lewis asks, do you recall how to locate the pivot point on the oar, and what percentage of the oar length from the handle?
Oh, I wish I had that stuff available for you. I don't really remember the details on that, but there definitely are sort of like rules of thumb that Peter was talking about that I wrote down someplace. Yeah, I'm sorry, not a good, I can't answer that question, but if you write me an email, right, I can try to look it up.
Yeah, for sure. John asks, Josh, when are you going to build this boat at North House?
I would love to. I would really love to build this boat at North House. You know, let's talk about it and talk to Jessa about it. Maybe we can bring Peter here. Peter could be interested in coming here. He's you know, he travels sometimes. Yeah. So.
Todd asks, what is the name of Peter's book?
It's just called Strand of Barmering. I wish I would have brought it with me. I didn't think about it because I was just doing this Zoom thing, but it's just called Strand of Barmering. It's all about the history of the Strand of Barmerins. And it sort of talks about all of Peter sort of going and traveling in the 80s and meeting all these 80-year-old boat builders who had been building since, you know, the early part of the 1900s, and learn the way that their dads told them. And so, and then just goes into a lot of the details I was showing you here. So it's a really great book, great pictures. So, but yeah, if you want to read it, you got to read Norwegian. So.
Mark asks, how many pieces is the stem made of?
It's usually made out of just one. So you can see here, this is one piece of oak from right about here to all the way up, and it's that simple scarf. There's no nib or anything to it. It's just a flat kind of wedge-shaped scarf. Yeah. You know what? I think there might be a piece here too. I take that back. This is made out of 2 pieces.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a two-piece stem. 1, 2. Then you have the straight keel and 2 pieces on the backside. Yeah. I'm sorry for that. I misanswered it.
Yeah. There's a few more questions that we will stick around to answer, but since we're right on the 8 o'clock mark, I did want to thank everyone for joining us. If you'd like to stick around and hear the answers to these last questions, please do. But if you need to take off, we totally understand. And we're so grateful for you joining us tonight. I did want to let everyone know that we'll be sending out an email to all of you who registered for this webinar tomorrow that will have a link to the recording of this session. So if you'd like to rewatch the webinar, you'll be able to do that. In that same email, we'll have an opportunity for you to sign up to be part of our email list so that you can get news and updates about other opportunities like this one. So you'll have the option to opt into that list in the follow-up email that we'll be sending out tomorrow. I also just wanted to say to everyone that as part of the Wooden Boat Show this week, we're always, this is always a week where we welcome lots of folks to campus, and we thank our members for their support. So thank you to all of our members who might be here on the webinar tonight. We really appreciate your support of the school. And as you can all imagine, this is a very financially difficult time for North House, as it is for many other institutions in the world. And so I'll just pop in the chat the link to our support page on our website. If you'd like to send us a donation or become a member, we always appreciate that as well. So I'll pop that in the chat, and then we'll get right back to these questions. So there's a few more here, Josh.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, Mark has a follow-up one about the stem. He's asking, what is the joint in the middle of the two pieces of the stem?
It's just a slope. They just carve like a simple, like kind of wedge-shaped scarf. So it's maybe 4 inches long, where it's just getting sort of its full thickness down to nothing. And then the other side, the other piece is doing that same thing on the opposite. So it's just a simple scarf joint.
Awesome. David is wondering, how would this boat be used today when it's built?
Well, wooden boats today are generally more of a luxury thing, so it's probably a rowboat, and it's a great rowboat. I would say it's really fast and efficient and comfortable rowboat, but there's no reason you couldn't haul a net over the side of it if you wanted to do a little net fishing. Yeah, they
Awesome.
do. You can't. There are sailing rigs that can be built for them too. Yeah.
Gotcha. Let's see. Douglas asks, one of the early shots of the oars showed what looked like an inserted piece or a wear piece? Question mark.
Oh, so yeah, they're all leathered. So there's a leather that goes around right where they're gonna rub on the shaper. So and then actually what was interesting is that the oos, I had never seen this, that Peter leathers his oars, but these guys just put a piece of like hardwood, like oak on there. So it's oak on oak. So that's another approach, but leathering is also just something that's done too. So.
Dan is suggesting that you teach an oar class. I think that was just a comment rather than a question. And the last one here from Rob is, what was the hardest part for you working with the Norwegians as a boat builder, and where was the joy?
Well, the hard part was, it was a hard. There's a lot of kind of technical, like just sort of things that were hard about being there. I wasn't able to do a lot of work because there was insurance issues going on. So sometimes it just felt like it was really hard to it's just hard to put my ego in check and sort of learn by just watching. And so it's hard to, just think that it's hard to just, I just had to just kind of keep telling myself, I know nothing. And I didn't really feel like I knew nothing, but I kind of had to constantly remind myself that I know nothing, so I could keep my mind open. But the joy was just developing a friendship with Petter and Arnie, and they were great guys, and just a lot of just times talking about our philosophy of life and stuff like that was just great. So yeah.
Awesome. So Josh, if folks had any follow-up that they wanted to follow up with you on, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, you can email me at josh@manywatersboats.com, or you can email me at jtolkan@northhouse.com. Definitely will think about doing an oar class, and definitely will think about trying to bring more of these traditional Norwegian boats to Northhouse somehow. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. I just popped Josh's email address there in the chat if anybody was looking for that. Otherwise, I think that's all we have for you folks tonight. Reminder that there's events going on tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week. Lots of fun and interesting things, not to be missed webinars and presentations throughout the week. So hopefully we'll see you on some of our other events this week. And thanks so much for being here tonight.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Sarah.